The snow was still falling when I heard the snowmobile's engine cut out abruptly, followed by the distinct crunch of metal against wood that every parent dreads. My heart jumped into my throat as I sprinted from my workshop toward the back 40 acres of our property in Eagle River, Wisconsin, where my 17-year-old son Quinn had been running training drills for his volunteer position with the county's search and rescue team. I found him about 300 yards from our barn, the snowmobile wedged against a thick oak tree at an angle that made my stomach flip. Quinn was already standing, shaking his head and inspecting the damage to the machine. He pulled off his helmet as I approached, revealing a sheepish grin beneath his frost-covered eyebrows. "Dad, before you say anything, the sled ran into an ice patch I didn't see." "I'm fine, just bruised my shoulder a bit," he said quickly, holding up his hands in surrender. I took a deep breath, relief flooding through me as I confirmed he was genuinely okay. The snowmobile looked worse than he did, with the front cowling crumpled and the right ski bent at an unnatural angle. Quinn had been training every weekend for the past 3 months, practicing navigation techniques and emergency response scenarios on our land. We had 20 acres of mixed terrain, perfect for the kind of realistic training the search and rescue coordinator wanted the volunteers to experience. "We'll get it fixed," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Let's drag it back to the barn and assess the damage properly." We were in the process of doing exactly that, using my ATV to tow the damaged snowmobile, when I noticed a silver sedan parked at the edge of our property line near the main road. A woman was standing beside it with her phone raised, clearly filming us. Even from a distance, I recognized her. Deanne Patterson, the president of the Timberline Estates Homeowners Association. My property sat on the border of the development, technically within the HOA boundaries, but with most of my acreage extending well beyond the manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses that made up the rest of the neighborhood. When I'd bought the land 5 years ago, the developer had assured me that the HOA covenants wouldn't affect my property usage beyond basic exterior maintenance of the house itself. I'd made sure that was written into my deed before signing. Deanne lowered her phone as I approached the property line, her expression pinched with disapproval. She was wearing a pristine white puffer jacket that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and her blonde hair was styled in that aggressive soccer mom cut that seemed to be required for HOA board members. "Mr. Lancaster," she called out, her voice carrying across the snow. "I've documented multiple violations occurring on your property today. Reckless operation of recreational vehicles, damage to protected tree specimens, and creating a public nuisance with excessive noise." I stopped the ATV and climbed off, keeping my expression neutral. "Deanne, this is private property. My son was training for search and rescue operations. The tree isn't protected, it's on my land, and there's nothing in the HOA rules about what I can do on my own acreage. The covenants clearly state that all property owners must maintain standards that preserve property values and prevent disturbances to other residents," she countered, pulling out a printed copy of the HOA rules from her oversized purse. Section 12, Paragraph 4 specifically addresses recreational vehicle usage. "On private roads and common areas," I finished for her. "I wrote those rules myself when I served on the board 3 years ago. Remember, they don't apply to private land use beyond the property line." Deanne's jaw tightened. She'd never forgiven me for voting against her proposal to ban pickup trucks from driveways during that brief stint on the board. "We'll see what the authorities have to say about it. I'm calling the sheriff's department to report this incident." Quinn had walked up behind me, still limping slightly. "Madam, I'm a registered volunteer with the county search and rescue program. This was an approved training exercise. I don't care if you're training for the Olympics, Deanne snapped. This neighborhood has standards, and your family seems determined to ignore them at every turn. She pulled out her phone and dialed before I could respond. I heard her speaking in clipped tones, reporting an accident involving a minor operating a recreational vehicle recklessly on private property. She made it sound like Quinn had been joyriding through a playground rather than conducting legitimate emergency response training on our own land. "The sheriff is sending a deputy," Deanne announced with satisfaction. "Perhaps you'll take this more seriously when it comes from law enforcement." I told Quinn to head inside and warm up while we waited. My wife Emma had taken our younger daughter to her basketball game in town, so at least she'd be spared this confrontation for now. I stayed near the barn, continuing to secure the damaged snowmobile while keeping an eye on Deanne, who remained at the property line like a sentinel guarding against suburban chaos. Deputy Mike Brewster arrived about 20 minutes later in his patrol vehicle. I'd known Mike since high school, and he'd responded to exactly one call on my property before, when a tourist had gotten lost and ended up in my driveway thinking it was a public campground. He climbed out of his cruiser with a resigned expression that told me he already knew this was going to be a waste of his time. "Quentin," he greeted me with a nod. "Got a call about a snowmobile accident?" "My son Quinn hit some ice during a training run," I explained. "He's fine. The sled's dinged up, and it all happened on my property during legitimate search and rescue training." Diane interjected before Mike could respond. "Deputy, I witnessed reckless operation of a recreational vehicle, property damage, and what appeared to be a serious accident involving a minor. As HOA president, I have a responsibility to ensure the safety and welfare of all residents." Mike turned to her slowly. "Mrs. Patterson, is anyone injured?" "Well, no, but is there property damage to anything other than Mr. Lancaster's own equipment and trees?" "That's not the point. The covenant clearly states, Madam," Mike said with infinite patience, "HOA covenants are civil matters. Unless there's a criminal violation or someone's in danger, this isn't really a sheriff's department issue." "So you're refusing to enforce the law?" Deanne's voice rose an octave. "There's no law being broken here," Mike replied. "Quinn Lancaster is registered with County Search and Rescue. I know because I helped coordinate the volunteer program last fall. He's authorized to conduct training exercises, and private property owners can operate recreational vehicles on their own land as long as they're not violating noise ordinances or endangering others." I watched Deanne's face cycle through several shades of red. "This is unacceptable. I want a full incident report filed. I'll document that I responded to a call and found no violations," Mike said diplomatically. "Mr. Lancaster, I'll need to see Quinn's volunteer registration just for the record." "Of course." I headed into the house, where Quinn was icing his shoulder at the kitchen table. He pulled up the digital registration on his phone, and I took a screenshot to show Mike. When I returned outside, Diane was in the middle of what appeared to be a well-rehearsed speech about declining neighborhood standards and the importance of HOA enforcement. Mike was nodding along with the glazed expression of someone who'd stopped listening several minutes ago. "Here's the registration," I said, showing him Quinn's phone. The County Search and Rescue logo was clearly visible, along with Quinn's photo and volunteer credentials. Mike took a quick photo for his report. "Everything looks in order, Mrs. Patterson. I'd recommend taking any concerns about HOA covenant violations to your board or seeking civil remedies if you believe there's a violation. This isn't a criminal matter." Deanne snatched the printed covenants back into her purse. Fine. The board will be addressing this at our emergency meeting tomorrow evening. Mr. Lancaster, you can expect to receive formal notification of violations and the associated fines. She stalked back to her sedan and drove off, leaving small ruts in the snow at the edge of my property. Mike watched her go and shook his head. She's been calling us at least twice a week lately, he said. Last week it was because the Hendersons painted their front door navy instead of black. The week before that, someone's garbage can was visible from the street for more than 2 hours after pickup. Sounds about right, I muttered. Thanks for coming out, Mike. No problem. Tell Quinn to be careful out there. We need good volunteers like him. He climbed back into his cruiser and headed back toward town. I went inside to find Quinn had moved from the kitchen to the living room, his shoulder properly wrapped with an ice pack. He looked worried, which bothered me more than Deanne's threats. Dad, I don't want to cause problems with the HOA, he said. Maybe I should train somewhere else. Absolutely not, I replied firmly. This is our land. You're doing important work and we're not breaking any rules. Let Deanne have her meeting. We'll deal with whatever comes next. What came next arrived via certified mail 2 days later. The envelope contained a formal notice of covenant violations, listing unauthorized recreational vehicle operation, creation of a public nuisance, property damage affecting neighborhood aesthetics, and failure to maintain standards consistent with community values. The fines totaled $8,000, with additional daily penalties if the violations weren't remediated within 14 days. Emma read the notice over breakfast, her expression moving from confusion to anger. They can't be serious. $8,000 for Quinn training on our own property. They're testing us, I said. Deanne's been looking for an excuse ever since I voted against her truck ban proposal. What exactly do they expect us to remediate? Emma asked, scanning the document again. It says we need to remove evidence of property damage and cease recreational vehicle operations in violation of community standards. Quinn pushed his eggs around his plate, guilt written across his face. I should just stop training here. No, Emma and I said simultaneously. This is bigger than just the training, Emma continued. If we let them push us around on this, they'll find something else next month and the month after that. We need to fight this properly. She was right, of course. Emma worked as a paralegal at a small law firm in town, and she had good instincts for these situations. I'd been prepared to just ignore the fines and wait for the HOA to make the next move, but her approach was smarter. I'll call Ron tomorrow, I said, referring to my lawyer friend who'd handled my property purchase. We need to make sure we're on solid ground before this escalates further. The emergency HOA meeting Deanne had mentioned turned out to be scheduled for that Thursday evening at the community center. The notice Emma found in our mailbox invited all homeowners to attend and provide input on important community standards enforcement issues. It didn't specifically mention our property, but the timing made it obvious. Thursday evening was cold and clear, the kind of winter night where the snow crunched underfoot and your breath froze in the air. Emma and I bundled up and drove the half-mile to the community center, where cars already filled the small parking lot. Apparently, everyone in Timberline Estates wanted to see what the fuss was about. The meeting room was set up with rows of folding chairs facing a table where Deanne sat with 4 other board members. I recognized most of them from various neighborhood gatherings. Karen Schultz, the treasurer, was a thin woman in her 50s who always wore too much jewelry. Bob Meredith, the secretary, was a retired accountant who treated HOA bylaws like they were the Constitution. The other 2 board members, Patricia Gomez and Tim Franklin, usually just went along with whatever Deanne proposed. Emma and I took seats in the back row. I counted about 30 other residents scattered throughout the room, most of them looking curious rather than hostile. The Hendersons, whose navy door had caused such controversy, gave us supportive nods from across the aisle. Deanne called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. "Thank you all for attending on short notice. We're here to address serious covenant violations that threaten the character and property values of our community." She proceeded to lay out the incident involving Quinn's snowmobile crash, as if it were a major criminal event. According to her version, Quinn had been operating dangerous equipment recklessly, causing property damage visible from neighboring homes, and creating excessive noise that disturbed the peaceful enjoyment of other residents. The Lancaster family was issued fines totaling $8,000, Deanne continued. However, they have shown no indication of compliance or even acknowledgement of these violations. This is exactly the kind of behavior that, left unchecked, leads to declining property values and neighborhood deterioration. Karen Schultz jumped in. "I drive past the Lancaster property every day, and I can confirm that the damaged snowmobile was visible from the road for at least 48 hours. That's a clear violation of our aesthetic standards." "The snowmobile was in my barn," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Deanne's eyes snapped to me. "Mr. Lancaster, this is not an open comment period." "Then maybe you should stick to facts instead of fiction," I replied. "The snowmobile was never visible from any public road. It was damaged during authorized search and rescue training, and my son is a registered volunteer with the county program." Several residents turned in their chairs to look at me with new interest. Bob Meredith shuffled his papers nervously. "The nature of the activity is irrelevant," Deanne insisted. "The covenants apply to all properties within HOA boundaries, regardless of how the owners choose to justify their violations." Emma stood up beside me. "Actually, that's not correct. My husband's property deed specifically excludes land use beyond the residential curtilage from HOA jurisdiction. The training took place more than 200 yards from the house, well outside any area covered by your covenants." "I don't know where you got your legal information," Karen said with a condescending smile, "but the HOA has reviewed the covenants with our attorney, and we're confident in our enforcement authority." "Which attorney would that be?" Emma asked. "Because the firm I work for specializes in property law, and we've reviewed the deed restrictions thoroughly." The room had gone quiet. Deanne's face was flushed, and she gripped her gavel like a weapon. "This meeting is not the appropriate venue for legal arguments. The board has made its decision, and the fines stand. If the Lancaster family wishes to contest them, they can file a formal appeal through the proper channels." "We'll do exactly that," I said. "And when we're done, this board might want to consider whether you're serving the community's interests or just using your positions to harass people you don't like." "That's out of order," Deanne banged the gavel. "Mr. and Mrs. Lancaster, if you can't conduct yourselves appropriately, I'll have you removed from this meeting." "We're leaving," Emma said calmly. "But I think everyone here should know that the board is issuing fines based on violations that don't exist, and they're doing it without proper legal authority. You might want to ask what other decisions they've been making without proper oversight." We walked out to scattered murmurs from the other residents. As we reached the parking lot, the Hendersons hurried out behind us. "That was amazing," Mrs. Henderson said breathlessly. "Deanne fined us $1,500 for the door paint, and we've been terrified to fight it." "You should fight it," Emma told her. "These boards only have the power we give them. If they're exceeding their authority, they need to be challenged. We exchanged phone numbers with the Hendersons and promised to share information about our lawyer's findings. As we drove home, I felt a mixture of anger and satisfaction. Anger at having to deal with this petness, but satisfaction that we weren't backing down. Ron called me back the next morning. "I pulled your property records and reviewed the HOA covenants. Emma's right. Your deed has explicit carve-outs for agricultural and recreational use of land beyond a 100-foot radius from the primary residence. The HOA has no jurisdiction over where Quinn was training. So the fines are bogus, completely unenforceable. More than that, if they continue pursuing this after being informed of the deed restrictions, they could be liable for harassment. You might want to consider a formal cease and desist letter." "Let's do it," I decided. "I want this documented properly." Ron drafted a detailed letter explaining the legal situation and demanding that the HOA withdraw the fines and cease any further enforcement actions related to land use on our property. He sent it via certified mail to Diane and all the board members, copying it to the HOA's registered agent. For a week, everything was quiet. Quinn continued his training, though he was more careful about ice patches and uneven terrain. The snowmobile was repaired with help from a friend who ran a small engine shop in town. Life seemed to be returning to normal. Then Emma came home from work with disturbing news. "I heard something through the legal grapevine today. The HOA hired Stuart Welsh to represent them." I recognized the name. Stuart Welsh was a notorious property lawyer who specialized in aggressive HOA enforcement. He'd made headlines a few years back for successfully foreclosing on a homeowner who'd fallen behind on HOA dues by less than $300. "They're really going nuclear over this," I said. "It gets worse." Apparently, Diane convinced the board to take out a special assessment against all homeowners to fund the legal battle. Everyone in Timberline Estates is being charged $500 to pay for their fight against us. That explained why my phone started ringing that evening. Resident after resident called to complain about the assessment and ask what was really going on. I explained the situation to each caller, emphasizing that we weren't violating any rules and the HOA was acting beyond its authority. By Sunday, a small rebellion was brewing. The Hendersons had organized a petition calling for Diane's removal from the board. 23 residents had already signed it, more than enough to trigger a special election, according to the HOA bylaws. Diane responded by scheduling another emergency meeting for Wednesday evening. The notice that arrived in every mailbox was formal and threatening, warning residents that opposition to proper HOA governance could result in individual enforcement actions and fines. The Wednesday meeting was packed. At least 60 people crowded into the community center, far more than had attended the previous meeting. The atmosphere was tense, with residents clustered in groups and speaking in low, angry voices. Diane called the meeting to order, but before she could launch into her prepared remarks, Jack Henderson stood up. "I'd like to make a motion to remove President Patterson from the board for exceeding her authority and misusing HOA funds." The room erupted in noise. Diane banged her gavel repeatedly, her face turning crimson. "That motion is out of order. This meeting was called to address the Lancaster violation, not to actually. The bylaws allow for removal motions at any properly noticed meeting," Bob Meredith said quietly. He looked uncomfortable but determined. "I reviewed the rules after several residents contacted me. If Mr. Henderson's motion is seconded, we have to allow it." "I second the motion," Patricia Gomez said, surprising everyone. She'd been one of Diane's most reliable supporters. Chaos reigned for the next 10 minutes as Deanne tried to regain control of the meeting. Karen Schultz argued that the motion violated parliamentary procedure. Tim Franklin suggested tabling it until the next regular meeting. But Bob held firm, reading directly from the bylaws that required an immediate vote on any removal motion that was properly made and seconded. Finally, Deanne had no choice but to allow the vote. She made each board member cast their vote publicly. Bob voted yes for removal. Patricia voted yes. Tim Franklin, looking miserable, voted yes. Karen Schultz voted no. The motion fails, Deanne declared triumphantly. 3 votes are required for removal, and excuse me, Bob interrupted. The bylaws specify that a majority of board members present constitutes sufficient votes for removal. With 5 board members and 1 abstaining from voting on her own removal, we needed 3 yes votes from the remaining 4. We got 3 yes votes. The motion passes. The room fell silent as everyone processed this. Deanne's mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice. This is a coup. You're all making a huge mistake. When Stuart Welsh hears about this, Mr. Welsh works for the HOA, not for you personally, Bob said. And one of the first things we need to do is review whether his engagement was properly authorized. Deanne gathered her papers with shaking hands and stormed out of the meeting. Karen Schultz followed her, leaving Bob, Patricia, and Tim to manage the aftermath. Bob took over as acting president and immediately moved to table all pending enforcement actions pending a full legal review. The motion passed unanimously. He then proposed rescinding the special assessment and returning the collected funds to homeowners. That also passed. Emma and I stayed for the entire meeting, which lasted another 2 hours as residents voiced complaints about various HOA overreaches from the past year. It turned out Deanne had been fining people left and right for minor violations, creating an atmosphere of fear and resentment throughout the neighborhood. As we were leaving, Patricia caught up to us. "I'm sorry about all of this. Deanne convinced us that you were trying to turn your property into some kind of commercial operation. She said you'd be running a snowmobile rental business next, destroying property values." "That was never true," I said. "My son is just trying to help people. Search and rescue volunteers save lives." "I know that now. We should have asked questions instead of just trusting Deanne's version of events." The following week brought more changes. Bob formally terminated Stuart Welsh's engagement, saving the HOA thousands in potential legal fees. The board issued a written apology to my family and to several other residents who'd been unfairly fined. Karen Schultz resigned from the board in protest, and 2 new members were elected to fill the vacancies. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 weeks after Deanne's removal, I was in my workshop one Saturday afternoon when Quinn came running in. "Dad, you need to see this." I followed him outside to where several signs had been planted along the property line. Each one featured a professional-looking design with bold red letters. "Dangerous training activities, children at risk, HOA president removed for trying to protect residents." My phone rang before I could finish reading the signs. It was Bob. "Quentin, I'm getting calls from everyone. Deanne's putting up signs all over the neighborhood claiming the board covered up safety violations on your property." "I'm looking at 4 of them right now," I said. "There are at least 20 throughout Timberline Estates." She's also posted on social media, saying that she was forced out because she tried to protect children from your dangerous activities. The posts are getting shared all over Eagle River. I took photos of the signs and called Ron. "Is there anything we can do about this?" "Defamation, possibly, but that's a high bar to clear. The bigger issue is whether she's trespassing on HOA common areas to place these signs. Let me make some calls. The social media posts were worse than the signs. Deanne had created a Facebook group called Protect Timberline Estates and was filling it with dramatic accounts of Quinn's snowmobile crash, complete with photos she'd taken from the property line. She'd edited them to make the damage look worse than it actually was, adding captions about reckless endangerment and negligent parenting. Emma was livid. This is beyond HOA petness. She's actively trying to damage our reputation and Quinn's standing with the search and rescue program. She was right to be concerned. By Sunday evening, the coordinator of the county search and rescue program called me. "Quentin, I need to talk to you about some concerning information I've received regarding Quinn's training activities." My stomach sank. Let me guess. Someone sent you Deanne Patterson's social media posts. Several people did, actually. Look, I don't want to suspend Quinn, but I need to understand what actually happened. These posts make it sound like he was joyriding and caused significant property damage. I spent an hour on the phone explaining the situation, sending him copies of Deputy Brewster's report, Ron's legal analysis, and the HOA board's written apology. The coordinator listened carefully and promised to review everything before making any decisions. Quinn was devastated when I told him. "This is exactly what I was worried about. Deanne's going to ruin everything I've worked for." "She's not going to ruin anything," Emma said firmly, "but we need to fight back properly this time." Ron advised us to send Diane a cease and desist letter demanding she remove the false and defamatory posts. We did that on Monday. By Tuesday, she'd not only refused to remove them but had doubled down, posting a copy of the cease and desist letter itself with commentary about how we were trying to silence her for speaking truth. "This woman has completely lost her grip on reality," I said to Emma after reading Deanne's latest post. "Or she knows exactly what she's doing," Emma replied. "She's been humiliated and removed from a position she clearly valued. Now she's lashing out." The situation escalated further when someone, presumably Deanne or one of her supporters, filed a complaint with Wisconsin's Department of Natural Resources, claiming I was operating an unauthorized commercial recreational vehicle park on my property. That triggered an inspection visit from a DNR ranger, who spent 3 hours reviewing my property boundaries, examining Quinn's training routes, and reviewing his search and rescue credentials. "Everything looks legitimate here," Ranger Mitchell told me as she prepared to leave. "Your son's activities are clearly personal recreational use and authorized training for a recognized volunteer program. Someone wasted a lot of my time with a baseless complaint. Can I get that in writing?" I asked. She provided an official letter stating that no violations had been found and no further action would be taken. I immediately posted it to social media, tagging Diane's Protect Timberline Estates group. The response was swift and ugly. Deanne accused me of bribing the DNR ranger. Others in her group claimed the inspection had been a cover-up. A few voices tried to inject reason into the discussion, but they were quickly shouted down by Diane's core supporters. Then things took a darker turn. I was in town running errands when I got a call from Emma. Her voice was shaking. "Quentin, someone spray painted our fence. You need to come home." I broke several speed limits getting back. The words "dangerous" and "liars" had been sprayed in red paint across 100 feet of our white fence facing the road. Emma was standing in the driveway, photographing the damage with her phone. "I already called the sheriff," she said, "and I'm posting these photos everywhere. This has gone way too far." Deputy Brewster arrived quickly and took a detailed report. "I'll be honest with you, This looks like a hate crime. The sheriff's office takes this stuff seriously, especially when it's targeted harassment following a documented dispute. Can you prove who did it? I asked. Not yet, but we'll start with anyone who's been actively involved in the social media campaign against your family. That's a pretty short list. The spray-painted fence made local news. The Eagle River Gazette ran a story about HOA disputes spiraling out of control, interviewing residents from Timberline Estates and getting reactions from both sides. Most people expressed shock that things had gotten so out of hand. A few of Diane's supporters repeated her claims about dangerous activities on my property, but they sounded less convincing in print without her dramatic embellishments. Quinn's search and rescue coordinator called again, this time with good news. I've reviewed everything thoroughly, including the DNR report and the sheriff's investigation. Quinn's done nothing wrong, and his training record is exemplary. In fact, I'd like him to participate in our advanced wilderness navigation course next month if he's interested. That lifted Quinn's spirits considerably, but the situation with Diane continued to fester. More complaints were filed, each one more frivolous than the last. Someone reported me to the county building inspector for allegedly constructing unauthorized structures. When the inspector came out, he found no such structures and issued another letter clearing me of violations. Another complaint went to the Wisconsin DNR claiming I was operating illegal snow grooming equipment. That resulted in another inspection, and another letter confirming no violations. Each time I received one of these official clearances, I posted it publicly. And each time, Diane's rhetoric became more extreme. She started claiming conspiracy theories, suggesting that I had connections to local government that were protecting me from legitimate enforcement. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in mid-February. Emma and I were having dinner when we heard glass breaking. I ran to the living room to find our front window shattered, a brick lying on the carpet surrounded by broken glass. Emma called the sheriff immediately. I was photographing the damage when I noticed something wrapped around the brick. I used a kitchen towel to carefully remove it without disturbing potential fingerprints. It was a printed flyer, the same design as the signs Diane had posted throughout the neighborhood, with her Protect Timberline Estates logo clearly visible. "Don't touch anything else," Deputy Brewster said when he arrived. "This is a felony. Whoever did this is looking at serious charges." The investigation moved quickly after that. Security camera footage from a neighbor's house showed a dark SUV driving slowly past our house around the time of the incident. The license plate was partially visible, and within hours, deputies had traced it to Karen Schultz's vehicle. Karen was arrested the next morning. During questioning, she broke down and admitted she'd thrown the brick through our window, but claimed Diane had encouraged her to take action against our family. According to Karen's statement, Diane had been meeting regularly with a small group of supporters, working them into a frenzy about the supposed dangers we represented to the community. Based on Karen's statement, detectives obtained a warrant to review Diane's social media accounts and private messages. What they found was disturbing. Diane had been actively soliciting people to harass our family, suggesting various forms of vandalism and intimidation. She'd promised to support anyone who took action against us, both legally and financially. Diane was arrested on Friday afternoon and charged with conspiracy to commit criminal damage to property and witness intimidation. The witness intimidation charge related to messages she'd sent to people who'd spoken in our favor at HOA meetings, threatening them with fines and other retribution. The arrests made headlines throughout northern Wisconsin. The story had everything: A power-hungry HOA president, a family trying to support their son's volunteer work, and a campaign of harassment that had spiraled into criminal activity. Quinn watched the news coverage with a mixture of relief and sadness. "I just wanted to help people." "How did it turn into all this?" "It's not your fault," Emma said. "Some people can't handle not being in control. Deanne created this situation, not you." The legal system ground forward methodically. Karen Schultz pleaded guilty to criminal damage to property and was sentenced to probation, community service, and restitution for our window and fence repairs. She seemed genuinely remorseful, crying in court as she apologized to our family. Diane's case was more complicated. She pleaded not guilty, claiming she'd never intended for anyone to actually commit crimes, and that her social media posts were protected free speech. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a dedicated community volunteer who'd simply gotten too invested in protecting neighborhood standards. Ron helped us prepare a victim impact statement for the sentencing hearing. Emma wrote most of it, detailing the months of stress and harassment our family had endured, the damage to Quinn's confidence, and the fear we'd felt after the brick came through our window. The trial took place in early April. Prosecutors presented evidence from Diane's social media messages, showing a clear pattern of encouraging harassment and promising to support anyone who took action against our family. Several Timberline Estates residents testified about meetings where Diane had worked to turn people against us, often using misleading or outright false information. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Diane showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, sitting rigid in her chair beside her attorney. At sentencing 2 weeks later, the judge was blunt. "Miss Patterson, you abused a position of trust within your community to pursue a personal vendetta against a family that had done nothing wrong. You encouraged criminal behavior and created an atmosphere of fear and intimidation. This court takes such conduct very seriously." Diane was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, with all but 90 days suspended, followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution for our fence repairs and legal fees, and to have no contact with our family or any Timberline Estates residents who testified against her. The courtroom was packed with residents from the neighborhood. As Diane was led away by deputies, I felt no satisfaction, just exhaustion and relief that it was finally over. The HOA underwent major changes after Diane's conviction. Bob continued as president and implemented new policies requiring board decisions to be made transparently, with detailed record-keeping and regular reports to all homeowners. The new board also revised the covenant enforcement procedures to include an appeals process and proportional penalties for actual violations. Patricia Gomez approached me at a neighborhood gathering in May. "I wanted you to know that we're working on a community award program to recognize residents who contribute positively to Timberline Estates. Quinn is going to be our first recipient for his service with search and rescue." I was touched. "That's not necessary." "Yes, it is," she insisted. "What happened to your family was wrong, and we need to acknowledge that publicly. Plus, Quinn really is doing something remarkable. Most kids his age are just focused on themselves." The award ceremony took place at the June community picnic. Quinn was embarrassed by the attention, but accepted the plaque graciously, and gave a short speech about the importance of volunteer emergency services. Several younger kids approached him afterward, asking about how to get involved with search and rescue. That summer, Quinn completed his advanced wilderness navigation training and became one of the youngest certified team leaders in the county program. He participated in 3 actual rescue operations, including helping locate a lost hiker in the Nicolet National Forest. The local news covered his involvement, and suddenly, he was a minor celebrity in Eagle River. Diane served her 90 days and was released on probation. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd moved to Green Bay to live with her sister, unable to face returning to Timberline Estates. Karen Schultz remained in the area but kept a low profile, focusing on rebuilding her reputation through volunteer work at the food bank. The Hendersons repainted their front door a cheerful yellow, and no one said a word about it. Several other residents made changes to their properties that previously would have triggered enforcement actions, testing the new board's commitment to reasonable governance. Bob and the other board members handled each situation with common sense and flexibility, earning widespread support. Emma and I spent a quiet evening on our porch in late August, watching the sun set over our property. Quinn was out on the back 40 with some friends from the search and rescue team, running navigation drills by flashlight. "You ever regret not backing down?" Emma asked. "It would have been easier just to move Quinn's training somewhere else." "Not for a second," I replied. "What we went through was hard, but the alternative was teaching Quinn that bullies win if you give in to them. He learned that standing up for what's right matters, even when it costs something." I'm proud of how he handled everything. A lot of kids would have crumbled under that pressure. We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the distant sound of Quinn's snowmobile engine echoing across the property. This land, this home, this life we'd built here had been worth fighting for. The Timberline Estates community continued to heal and evolve. At the September HOA meeting, attendance was robust but relaxed, with homeowners actually engaged in productive discussions about community improvements rather than fearful of arbitrary enforcement actions. Bob reported that the HOA's legal fees had dropped by 80% compared to the previous year, and member satisfaction surveys showed dramatically improved ratings. I was asked to rejoin the board, but I declined. I'd served my time in HOA governance and had no desire to repeat the experience. Instead, I offered to help with the Neighborhood Emergency Preparedness Committee, coordinating with Quinn's search and rescue program to provide basic wilderness safety training for interested residents. In October, Quinn received a commendation from the County Board of Supervisors for his role in locating 2 missing children who'd wandered away from a campground. The search had lasted 14 hours, and Quinn's tracking skills had been instrumental in finding them before nightfall. The children's parents attended the commendation ceremony, tearfully thanking Quinn and the entire search and rescue team. Watching my son accept that recognition, standing tall in his search and rescue jacket with absolute confidence in his skills and purpose, I knew that everything we'd gone through had been worth it. Deanne Patterson had tried to use her petty authority to control people and punish anyone who didn't conform to her narrow vision of how the neighborhood should operate. Instead, she'd inadvertently strengthened our family and helped Quinn become the kind of young man who saves lives. Winter returned to Eagle River, bringing fresh snow and cold temperatures. Quinn's training intensified as the search and rescue program prepared for peak winter emergency season. He'd improved his technique significantly, adding advanced cold weather survival skills and avalanche awareness to his repertoire. The snowmobile that had been damaged in the crash that started everything had become something of a lucky charm, fully repaired and running better than ever. On a crisp December morning, Quinn headed out for a training run while I worked in my shop. I heard the snowmobile's engine roar to life and watched through the window as he disappeared into the tree line, following the practice routes he'd carved through our back property. The sound faded into the distance, leaving only peaceful silence broken by the occasional call of a winter bird. My phone buzzed with a message from Emma. She'd sent a photo from the community center, where she was helping decorate for the neighborhood holiday party. The transformation of Timberline Estates over the past year was remarkable. From a fear-driven community under Diane's authoritarian rule to a genuine neighborhood where people actually wanted to spend time together. The holiday party that evening was well attended and genuinely enjoyable. Kids ran around the community center while parents socialized and shared food. Quinn spent most of the evening talking to younger kids about search and rescue work, his enthusiasm infectious. Several parents thanked me for letting him train on our property, acknowledging that his work was valuable to the entire community. Bob gave a short speech reflecting on the changes the neighborhood had experienced. This time last year, a lot of us were afraid to speak up at meetings or express opinions that might differ from the board's positions. We've learned that real community isn't about rigid rules and fear of violations. It's about neighbors supporting neighbors and working together to make this a better place to live. The applause was genuine and sustained. Patricia Gomez added, "We also learned that when someone in our community is doing something good, like Quinn's search and rescue work, we should celebrate and support that instead of looking for reasons to tear it down." As we drove home that night, Quinn was quiet. Finally, he said, "Dad, I've been thinking about what I want to do after high school. There's a wilderness EMT program in Montana that works with national park search and rescue teams. It's really competitive, but I want to try for it." "That sounds perfect for you," I said, feeling proud and a little melancholy that he was already planning to leave home. "I probably wouldn't have the confidence to even apply if we'd given up when Mrs. Patterson started causing trouble," Quinn continued. "You and Mom taught me that doing the right thing matters more than avoiding conflict." Emma reached back from the front seat to squeeze his hand. "You taught yourself that, sweetheart. We just refused to let someone else tell you that you couldn't." The year ended quietly, with our family healthy and whole, our home peaceful, and our community transformed. The legal system had worked, slowly but effectively, holding Diane accountable for her actions and protecting our rights. The HOA had reformed itself, returning to its proper role of managing common areas and facilitating community connection, rather than wielding power over individual homeowners. In February, Quinn received his acceptance letter to the Wilderness EMT program. He'd start in August, right after his 18th birthday. The search and rescue coordinator asked him to help train the next generation of volunteers during the summer months, recognizing his skills and leadership qualities. I spent a warm March afternoon repairing fence posts along our property line, the same fence that had been vandalized a year earlier. The wood had weathered well, and the paint had held up. As I worked, I thought about how something as simple as a son training on family land had triggered such a dramatic series of events. But really, it had never been about the training or the snowmobile or even the HOA rules. It had been about power and control, about someone who couldn't tolerate anything that fell outside her rigid vision of how things should be. Diane Patterson had turned the HOA into a weapon to enforce conformity and punish independence, and that had ultimately destroyed her. The real tragedy was that it had never needed to happen. If Diane had approached us with curiosity instead of hostility, if she'd asked questions instead of making assumptions, if she'd seen Quinn's training as an asset to the community instead of a threat to her authority, everything would have been different. She'd still be leading the HOA, probably doing genuinely good work for the neighborhood. Karen Schultz wouldn't have a criminal record. Our family wouldn't have spent months dealing with harassment and vandalism, but we also wouldn't have learned what we were capable of withstanding. We wouldn't have seen the community come together to reject authoritarian governance. Quinn wouldn't have developed the backbone that came from standing firm in the face of unjust attacks. As I hammered in the last fence post, I heard the familiar sound of Quinn's snowmobile approaching. He pulled up next to me, his face flushed from the cold and grinning widely. "Dad, I just got a call from the coordinator. There's a lost cross-country skier in the Chequamegon Nicolet Forest. They want me to join the search team." "Then get going," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Be safe out there." I watched him race back to the house to grab his emergency gear, then head out in his truck toward the staging area. This was what it had all been for, what we'd fought to protect. Not just the right to use our own property as we saw fit, but Quinn's ability to develop his skills and serve his community in meaningful ways. Emma joined me at the fence line as Quinn's truck disappeared down the road. "Think they'll find the skier?" "If Quinn's on the team, I'd bet on it," I replied. We walked back to the house together as afternoon faded into evening. The lights of Timberline Estates twinkled in the distance, peaceful and welcoming. Somewhere out there, Quinn was doing exactly what he'd trained for, using skills he'd developed on this land that we'd refused to stop using despite all the pressure and harassment. The HOA wars were over, ended not by surrender or compromise, but by standing firm on principle and letting the legal system do its job. Our family had emerged stronger, our community was healthier, and Quinn was saving lives. In the end, that was the only outcome that really mattered. The search for the lost skier ended successfully, just after midnight. Quinn called to let us know the person had been found hypothermic but alive, rescued before serious injury could occur. His voice carried pride and exhaustion in equal measure, the satisfaction of knowing his training and dedication had helped save a life. As I hung up the phone and turned off the lights, I looked out at our property one last time. 20 acres of Wisconsin woodland, hills and valleys perfect for training, the land we'd fought to use freely. It looked exactly the same as it had a year ago, but everything had changed. Diane Patterson was gone, her brief reign of petty tyranny ended by her own extremism. The HOA had learned that real leadership meant service, not control. Our family had proven that standing up to bullies, even ones with official-sounding titles and legal threats, was worth the cost. And Quinn had become exactly the kind of person the world needed more of, someone willing to risk comfort and safety to help others. The story could have ended differently. We could have backed down, moved Quinn's training elsewhere, accepted that keeping peace with the HOA was more important than defending our principles. If we had, Deanne would still be president, still fining people for painted doors and visible garbage cans, still wielding her small authority like a weapon against anyone who stepped out of line. Instead, by refusing to submit to unjust demands, we'd accidentally liberated an entire neighborhood. The residents of Timberline Estates were no longer afraid to express opinions, make reasonable changes to their properties, or question board decisions. The HOA had become what it should have been all along, an administrative body serving the community rather than ruling it. Sometimes standing up for what's right is simple and clear-cut. Sometimes it's messy and complicated and takes months to resolve. But it's always worth doing, even when the immediate cost seems high. Especially then, because that's when it matters most. As spring turned to summer and Quinn's departure for Montana approached, I reflected on everything we'd learned. The importance of community support, the value of persistence in the face of unjust opposition, and the way a single person's determination to control others can poison an entire neighborhood. But also the way ordinary people, when pushed far enough, will stand up for fairness and common sense. Quinn left for his wilderness EMT program in August, driving away with a truck full of gear and a head full of dreams. Emma and I stood in the driveway, watching until he disappeared from sight, feeling the particular mix of pride and sadness that comes with watching your child step confidently into their future. The house felt quiet without him, but Timberline Estates continued to thrive. Bob served another term as HOA president before stepping down, his leadership having successfully transformed the organization. The new board continued his policies of transparency and reasonable governance, proving that the changes were lasting rather than temporary. I saw Karen Schultz occasionally around town. She always looked away quickly, unable or unwilling to make eye contact. I bore her no ill will. She'd been manipulated by Diane's rhetoric and had paid the price for her actions. That seemed sufficient. Of Diane herself, I heard nothing for more than a year. Then one day, Emma came across a news article from Green Bay. Diane had been arrested again, this time for harassing members of her new condo association board. Apparently, she tried to organize opposition to parking rule changes, and when that failed, had begun a social media campaign remarkably similar to the one she'd waged against our family. Some people never learn, Emma said, showing me the article. I read it with a sense of inevitability. Diane Patterson was who she was, someone who needed to control her environment and the people in it, who couldn't tolerate anyone operating outside her preferred rules. She'd destroy herself repeatedly by taking things too far, always convinced she was right even as the consequences mounted. But that was her story, not ours. Our story had ended well, with Quinn pursuing his dreams, our family intact and strengthened, and our community transformed for the better. The land we'd fought to use freely continued to serve its purpose, now hosting training sessions for multiple search and rescue volunteers who'd been inspired by Quinn's example. On a cold January morning 3 years after everything started, I received a phone call that brought everything full circle. The voice on the other end was professional but warm. "Mr. Lancaster, this is Captain Jennifer Walsh from the Vilas County Sheriff's Office. I wanted to let you know that your son Quinn has been nominated for the state of Wisconsin's Citizen Heroism Award. He and his search and rescue team saved 4 people trapped by an avalanche in the Porcupine Mountains last week. The rescue was incredibly dangerous, and Quinn's leadership was critical to its success. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. Thank you for letting me know. There's going to be a ceremony in Madison in March," Captain Walsh continued. "The governor will be presenting the award. We hope you and your family can attend." After we hung up, I walked out to the back 40 where Quinn had trained for so many hours. The snow was deep and pristine, marked only by the tracks of deer and small animals. I thought about the journey that had started with a simple training accident and spiraled into HOA harassment, criminal charges, and community transformation. If Diane Patterson hadn't called the police that first day, if she'd simply minded her own business or approached with curiosity instead of hostility, none of what followed would have happened. Quinn would still have become an excellent search and rescue volunteer, but he wouldn't have developed the particular steel that came from being attacked for doing nothing wrong. The HOA would still be operating under authoritarian policies, fining residents for trivial violations, and creating an atmosphere of fear. The community would be weaker, more divided, less connected, all because no one had stood up to challenge unjust authority. In that sense, Diane had accidentally given us all a gift, though not the one she intended. By overreaching so dramatically, by turning a minor incident into a crusade, she'd forced everyone to examine what kind of community they wanted to live in. And when given that choice, people had chosen freedom, flexibility, and mutual support over rigid rules and punitive enforcement. The award ceremony in Madison was magnificent. Quinn stood on stage in his dress uniform, accepting recognition from the governor himself, while hundreds of people applauded. Emma squeezed my hand as tears ran down both our cheeks. Our son had become exactly who he was meant to be, someone who ran toward danger to help others, someone whose training and skills saved lives. After the ceremony, several reporters wanted to interview Quinn about his background and training. He spoke confidently about the importance of wilderness skills and emergency preparedness, mentioning how he'd started training on our family land as a teenager. No one asked about the HOA troubles, and he didn't bring them up. That chapter was closed. We drove home to Eagle River the next day, the award plaque safely packed in Quinn's luggage. He'd return to Montana in a few days to continue his work. But for now, we had time together as a family, reflecting on how far we'd all come. The Timberline Estates Community Center hosted a celebration for Quinn's award, with residents from throughout the neighborhood attending. Even people who'd never really known our family showed up to recognize one of their own achieving something remarkable. Bob gave a short speech about how Quinn represented the best of what their community could produce when it supported, rather than hindered, individual excellence. As the celebration wound down, I found myself talking with several younger residents who joined the neighborhood after all the drama with Deanne. They'd heard stories about what had happened, but found them almost unbelievable. The HOA really tried to fine you thousands of dollars just because Quinn was training here, one young father asked incredulously. That and more, I confirmed. It got pretty ugly before it got better. I can't imagine our HOA doing something like that now, he said, looking around at the friendly, relaxed gathering. Everyone's so reasonable and supportive. That was the real victory, I realized. Not just that we'd successfully defended our rights, not just that Quinn had gone on to do amazing things, but that the community had fundamentally changed its culture. New residents couldn't even imagine the atmosphere of fear and control that had existed just a few years earlier. Quinn returned to Montana, back to his work saving lives in wilderness settings. Emma and I settled back into our routines, our quiet life in northern Wisconsin. The snowmobile sat in the barn, maintained and ready for whenever Quinn came home to visit and wanted to run his old training routes. Sometimes I'd walk the trails he'd carved through our property, following the path where that initial accident had occurred. The tree he'd hit still bore a small scar from the impact, a reminder of how something so minor had triggered such significant events. But mostly the land was just land, beautiful and peaceful, exactly what we'd wanted when we bought it. The legal bills had been substantial, several $1,000s even with Ron's friendly rates. The fence repairs, window replacement, and other costs from the harassment added up. But we'd never once regretted the expense. Some things are worth fighting for, and the right to live freely on your own property, to support your child's development, and to stand against unjust authority definitely qualified. Years continued to pass peacefully. Quinn advanced in his career, eventually becoming a lead instructor for wilderness emergency response training. He met someone, got married, and started building his own life while maintaining close ties to his roots in Eagle River. When he had children of his own, he brought them to visit our land, showing them the trails where he'd trained and telling them stories about standing up for what's right. The Timberline Estates, HOA, continued to operate smoothly under successive boards, each maintaining the culture of reasonable governance and community support that had emerged from the crisis. Occasionally, someone would propose reverting to stricter enforcement policies, but those proposals never gained traction. Too many residents remembered what that approach had led to and had no interest in repeating those mistakes. I ran into Bob at the hardware store one autumn afternoon, both of us picking up supplies for winter preparations. We chatted about the upcoming snow season and neighborhood news. "You know," Bob said as we were parting, "serving as HOA president during all that drama with Deanne was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but also one of the most important. We really did transform the community." "You absolutely did," I agreed. "Quinn's success is partly thanks to your willingness to stand up to Deanne and support what was right. Quinn's success is because you raised him well and refused to back down when someone tried to stop him from developing his talents," Bob replied. "You set an example for all of us." We shook hands and went our separate ways. I drove home thinking about the interconnected nature of community, how one person's courage or cowardice ripples outward, affecting dozens or hundreds of others. Diane's authoritarian approach had poisoned the neighborhood. Our family's resistance had helped heal it. Quinn's dedication had inspired others. Bob's leadership had institutionalized positive change. The sun was setting over our property as I pulled into the driveway, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of orange and pink. Inside, Emma was making dinner, the warm smell of cooking filling the house. This simple, peaceful life was what we'd fought to protect, and we'd succeeded. Looking back on everything that happened, from Quinn's initial crash to Deanne's arrest to the years of positive growth that followed, I felt satisfied with how things had turned out. The story could have ended badly, with our family bullied into submission or the community fractured beyond repair. Instead, it had become a story about standing up to petty tyranny, about community members finding their voice, about a young man developing into exactly the kind of person who makes the world better. The snowmobile in our barn wasn't just a piece of equipment anymore. It was a symbol of the principle that free people on their own land should be able to live their lives, pursue their goals, and raise their children without unjust interference. It represented Quinn's dedication to helping others, and our family's refusal to be intimidated by someone abusing a small amount of authority. And ultimately, it represented hope that ordinary people, when pushed far enough, will choose freedom and fairness over control and conformity. That lesson, learned through months of conflict and stress, proved more valuable than any amount of peace purchased through submission would have been. The lights of Timberline Estates twinkled in the growing darkness, each window representing a family living freely, unburdened by fear of arbitrary enforcement or petty fines. Somewhere out west, Quinn was preparing for another day of training people to save lives in wilderness settings. And on our 20 acres in Eagle River, Wisconsin, the land that had sparked such controversy lay peaceful under fresh snow, ready for whatever came next.